Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Danish Warehouse on this Friday afternoon. We are here with Jens Mattias Clausen, a Danish climate campaigner, and we've taken a whole bunch of your questions to talk about Paris. Not only is it the city of love, but it also was the scene of some pretty groundbreaking and interesting climate negotiations this past December. And Jens was on the spot in Paris in the negotiations and on the streets during that time. And so we're going to ask him sort of what really happened in Paris. Why is it important? What can we do to use Paris into the future? So thank you for all of your questions, and I hope you enjoy this rendition of Greenpeace TV from the Danish Warehouse. All right, Jens, you are a Danish climate campaigner, and where are you from, actually, in Denmark?
Well, I'm from the island of Funen, from a city called Middelfart, which always brings about a lot of laughs. So it's a small town of around 20,000 people. But I've been living in Copenhagen for the past about 10 years now.
Cool. Okay, so you come from the countryside in Denmark. So
Yeah.
how in the world does somebody from a small town called Middelfart in Denmark end up as a climate campaigner in Greenpeace and going to COP negotiations in Paris? How did you end up here?
Well, that's a pretty good question. I think I've always wanted to work within civil society for as long as I can remember. I've never wanted to be part of the establishment. I've never wanted to work in a ministry or in the administration or anything like that. I've always wanted to, it might sound a bit corny, but to kind of change the world. Mm-hmm. So I've been working in many different parts of civil society for the past many years now. And climate I've been working on for now, I guess it's like 7 years. So from different angles, I've been from indigenous people's rights to forests to now it's basically the whole shebang in Greenpeace, covering a lot of different things. But it has changed a bit, but it's always been the core of it has been quite similar throughout the years.
Nice. Let's move to the City of Love this past December. Exciting times. But let's just start first with, in general, we talk about COP all the time. What is COP? Where did it come from? Why did it start? What is its mandate?
Yeah, we have to go back to 1992, the year where Denmark won the European Championship in football, but where we had the so-called Earth Summit. So that was when, all the countries in the world gathered to talk about sustainability in different ways. That was also where the Climate Convention under the UN, the United Nations, was founded. And along with the less famous conventions of Convention Against Desertification, so against lands becoming deserts, and also the Convention on Biodiversity. So the most famous one is the Climate Convention, and that started in 1992. And then a COP is basically referring to what they call the Conference of the Parties being the countries. And that the first COP was in 1995. And then we've had a COP every single year since then to have climate negotiations to see how we can, based on the convention, can try to avoid the most catastrophic consequence of climate change and how we can help adapt to it as well.
Great. Good to know. I've seen these clips of the chairman kind of hitting the gavel and down and everybody cheering and this fantastic moment. Were you in the room?
I was. Yeah.
And what was the mood?
I would say ecstatic among most people. A lot of people have been working this for many, many years. So even though, it's very clear that this deal is by no means perfect, and it's definitely not what we could have hoped for much more, but to be honest, it was also a lot better than we could have expected. Something that people tend to forget is this is a process where all countries in the world basically have the right to veto. So, for example, countries that depend on exporting fossil fuels like oil, like Saudi Arabia, could basically say, no, we don't want to do this, and we won't have a deal. So in that context, I really think it was actually a pretty strong deal. Excellent. It's actually a really strong deal. So we have something to work on. Like, this deal was never going to save the world in itself, but what it can do and what it hopefully will do is speed up the transition, the green transition we're seeing, and help the poorest and most vulnerable countries to adapt better to what's happening. But there was a very ecstatic mood, and I think, at least for me as well, it's like always kind of thinking ahead, seeing like, so how can we use this when we're done here in Paris? How can we, go even further?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's like the big question. I think on a lot of people's minds is sort of, okay, we're all supposed to hear and believe that this was a really, really great thing that happened, and we all lived through the horrors of COP15 and the failures and the disappointments of all of that whole process, and now finally, oh my gosh, despite all the odds, Paris delivered.
Yeah.
But then I think a lot of us who aren't there, who aren't in these specific negotiations, wonder like, okay, did it really deliver? What does it even mean?
Yeah. And that's completely understandable, because this is a really like weird, complex process. And of course, what it doesn't do is it won't force countries to do something. And that's what a lot of people have been complaining about. But the problem is, right now, you don't have an international like legal system that would ever allow to do anyway. Like for example, Kyoto, many people refer to it because that was legally binding. But the problem is that even with Kyoto, even if it is internationally legally binding, you can't force countries to do anything. That's what you saw with like Canada and others that just refuse to do what they had promised to do. So what Paris does deliver, it sends out a very clear direction of travel. It shows like it basically, in many ways, what happened in Paris, the goals that they agreed upon, is basically saying goodbye to fossil fuels now. And that's really, really big. Of course, now we have to make sure that countries actually not just implement the targets that they have agreed to, but also ramp up the level of ambition, because otherwise it's just not sufficient. But Paris, in many ways, also for me at least, it was a very strong signal to the real world outside the negotiation halls, to investors and policymakers at all levels, that we're moving away from coal, oil, gas, and so on, and towards 100% renewable energy. And I think, for example, if you're an investor now and you want to look at whether you should invest in a coal-fired power plant, you're not going to do that. Well, many won't, at least, it's because it's become a lot riskier. Because you would want that coal-fired power plant to run for at least 40 years. And then if you have a global agreement that basically implies that there will be no more use of fossil fuels within 35 years, right? I mean, then you're not going to make that decision. So it's changing the game, right? There's a new normal after Paris, and that's really what it does in many ways.
Yeah, it seemed like it was something that, I don't know the details of like what actually now legally happens, but in general there was like this message that was sent that okay like no more of the old, like the new paradigm is
Exactly.
is that at least that message goes out and the ripple effects.
And for us and for Greenpeace, for example, as a campaign organization, it gives us a really strong platform on which to do our work. I mean, now you got in Paris, you basically strengthen the temperature threshold from just 2 degrees to like well below pursuing 1.5 degrees instead. And that has very clear consequences. I mean, right now in the EU, they're discussing whether to ramp up their level of ambition. And we can come and say now, what you have is just not compatible with what you agreed to in Paris. So you should put your money where your mouth is and actually ramp it up. And it's very difficult for the youths to argue against it. So that means we have completely new ways of pressuring them to do more.
Let's take it back a little bit to Greenpeace, as you just mentioned. We're sitting here having this interview in a climbing room. We have a bunch of suits around us, and here's some NVDA training equipment, arm braces for actions. We have a bunch of climbing stuff behind us. What's the impression of Greenpeace at these COPs? Are we seen as these sort of radical dreamers that are sort of disregarded in these high level negotiations, or are we seen as sort of real players and with scientific proof, and that we really have a voice at the table.
I'd say we're like very well regarded. People really know that we know what we're talking about. When we're in there, it's quite different to being out there doing actions, whatever. But we always make sure that whatever we do is based on really sound science, and our political analysis is always really strong as well. So when we're in there, we're really being taken seriously, and governments come to us as well for advice on how to do different things, the ones that we align to in terms of positions. And I mean, sure, in some ways we might be regarded as dreamers, but things change. What used to be dreams will become reality at some point. It's not more than like a year and a half ago that our dream of 100% renewable energy was, people laughed at it. But now, after Paris and even in Paris, a lot of people, like mainstream people and actors, are talking about this as the future. You just had, like last week, you had the European Commissioner saying, maybe, we probably have to get to 100% renewable energy at some point. I mean, we are changing the conversation about what is possible, and I think that's a very important role to have. So even if in the beginning you might be regarded as dreamers.
And so you think that we are actually possibly at the forefront driving that?
Sure, and that's exactly what we need to be as well. We can't just always operate within what is perceived as being the political reality, what you can do normally. We have to push the boundaries and create a new political reality that is consistent with the world we want to see.
And how about just thinking a bit too of what some of the things Greenpeace was involved in, and not just Greenpeace that was there. There was tons of movements there, and of course it was just after the big attacks in Paris, so there was a huge crackdown on protest. But there was really some creative things that happened with the shoes that were placed as sort of a representation of the people that weren't allowed to be on the streets, but were still making a stand, and that got so much attention. And then, of course, the beautiful sun, where they put the yellow paint around the Arc de Triomphe and stuff like that. So what was I know you were in the building, but what was the mood out on the street too in Paris at the time? Was it this feeling of revolution in the air, or was it?
It was a bit difficult because many of the things we had really planned to do, we weren't able to do. So we really had to improvise a lot. You mentioned the sun that we did Arc de Triomphe, but that was beautiful, and that was really, huge kudos to the people that are doing this for us, because, they only had a few weeks to prepare such a massive action. But it also meant that we didn't really have those kind of, massive manifestations that we would have liked to see. So I wasn't really to that extent out there. I couldn't, of course I was out talking to people, and you could feel that people really wanted something to happen. But I think in many ways, people all around the world really, took up the baton and showed how to do it. We had almost 800,000 people on the streets all around in more than 100 countries, a lot more than 100 countries around the world. So, they marched for us because we couldn't do it in Paris, so we tried to do other things.
Yeah, great. Back to the cups a little bit. We saw what happened in COP15 in Copenhagen, and that really, in terms of, I think, not just Greenpeace, but the whole climate movement in general, was a lot of people really kind of hibernated after that and sort of said, this was supposed to deliver, and this whole process is just crap. What are the cups? Do they do more harm than good? Are they an activism recruitment tool to get people to really come together and put pressure where it's needed, or can it be seen as sort of, well, we're giving all the power up to those that are in charge and have the power, and it makes people possibly passive and disengaged?
I think you can't see it as either or. I think this process definitely has its place. You need to have a forum where all countries in the world can meet to discuss this. I mean, it's so easy to say, the UN doesn't deliver anything. Of course, now it's been proven wrong, but, people still say that. But people have to remember that if you don't have this process, you're just going to be discussing climate in G20 or G8 or something. So it'll only be the richest and the biggest countries that will have a say. This process ensures that all the smallest and the most vulnerable countries in the world have a voice. theoretically they can actually veto one of these deals. So that means that when they go together in alliances, which they really do in these processes, they can have a big say in the direction the world is taking. And I think, in many ways, if you disregard that, then that's a big part of the solidarity, let's say, scope that you're removing.
Mm. Mm.
And whether, it's good for recruitment grounds and movement, all these things, depends on what you do. As Greenpeace, that's what we try to do in Paris and at least in connection with Paris and outside of Paris. And I think we really succeeded, with the help of, 350 of us and many others, we created some big movements around it. But it's not going to be like that every time. I guess this year in Marrakesh, is going to be more nerdy, more technical, but also extremely important. It's important that we're there to make sure that what's happening now gives us the best tools to do our work on the ground in the individual countries. And maybe it won't be that easy to mobilize people for that, but that doesn't mean it's any less important, in my view at least.
And then there's another question here. By the way, most all of these questions are coming in from volunteers, so thank you all for your contributions. Whatever anybody says, either way, COP21 was a big historic deal.
Yeah.
And how do we use that leverage back home? I mean, again, it's sort of seen as this symbol of the new paradigm, and that we can hold politicians accountable now. And when possibly, some of the big actions that Greenpeace is involved in, what the broader climate movement is involved in coming up, now we kind of have this like wind in our sails that's like, hey, that's right, we're doing this action right now because you guys agreed to this, so hurry it up, and there's this like support structure under activism now for this. But how do we use all of that? How do we use what happened at COP? I guess this is the $1 million question, to leverage politicians back home and get this change going even faster.
But that's exactly, I kind of alluded to it before as well. This provides us with a platform to do the work we need to do. It makes it so much easier to tell politicians, in the EU, in Denmark, on a municipal level, that they need to up their game, because now there's a global deal that says that we're moving in this direction. Before, they could always excuse themselves with saying, not everyone is doing the same thing. Not all countries in the world are pulling in the same direction. China, they're not doing anything, which is, by the way, not true at all. China is doing a lot more than the EU at the moment. And I mean, this really provides us with a lot of tools. In the end, that's something that's probably the best thing that came out of it. But in the end, we need to see how we can also strengthen the climate movement, because I think that was one of the big positives from Paris as well. It's not just the deal itself, but the climate movement really showed itself from the best side ever, and we're only getting stronger from here. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us. I mean, even if Paris in many ways signaled the end of the fossil fuel era, at least the beginning of the end, we know that these companies, they will fight to the end to undermine this. But I think with the help of people power, we can actually win. And of course, we are in a bit of a hurry. Everyone knows that the planet is warming and faster than we actually anticipated. But I think there's a lot of good things going on, and Paris is just gonna help improve that as well. You see, like China just like yesterday came out with their new 5-year plan, and basically saying they're going to enhance the international commitments they already put down on the table in Paris. That is really strong. So you have now a process that kind of where some countries going ahead of others will pressure the other ones to take action as well. It's going to be difficult for the EU to ignore what China is doing. So hopefully, you're going to get this momentum rolling again. And that's the big challenge after a COP like this, is to ensure that this keeps high in the political agenda. And not just, then all the participants be like, okay, so now we did our job, and now, we can meet again in 5 years and see what happens.
Right.
And that's what we have to avoid.
Yeah.
So we have to create, also as civil society, those political moments to put pressure on all the different actors, not just politicians, but also, pension funds, companies, whatever. And we have a lot of interesting plans for doing that as well.
And one final question, speaking of actors, Leonardo DiCaprio. Did you see his speech at the Oscars?
Yes, it was beautiful.
You liked it?
I did.
What was your favorite part of it?
I don't remember like all the different words and sentences, but I don't know. Which one was your favorite part?
I don't know my favorite part, but it's nice that people like him are using their power to in a good positive way, and he's got such a great delivery and voice.
And it kind of also reminds us always that we need to reach out to other audiences than the usual suspects. Of course, it's extremely important to keep mobilizing the good people that we already have with us, fighting the good cause. But we need to make sure that more people understand the plight that we're in and what we need to do.
Yeah, great. Jens, we're gonna call it a day here. Thanks a lot for joining us in the climbing room today, and thank you all for your questions. And we'll see you next time.